welcome back to the hack session for today. And as Eric said, I'm going to go through the process for making a contribution to PlasmaPy. And the link that I posted in the chat covers the steps that I'm going to take. There are a few prerequisites. So beforehand, it's important to have a GitHub account. So I'll post that in the chat. And that will enable you to do a lot of these steps. There's also installing Git, which is, again, important to do this. And so we'll assume that we'll have started from those already. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, hopefully that's showing up okay. So once you have,
I can see it.
Awesome. All right. So you might have done these steps yesterday, but when you first install Git, you want to set your username and email. So we do git config -- global user.name, and then my name is Nick Murphy, and then git config -- global user.email, and I'll put mine in there too. And then enter. Okay. The next thing to do is to go to the website for the repository. So the question David asked, is it necessary to install Git, or can you just download the desktop version of GitHub? You can download the desktop version of GitHub. What I'll be going through here will use the command line as an example.
Does the desktop version of GitHub install Git when you install that app? You know?
Presumably it does, but it's not necessarily. I mean, I basically run through the GitHub GUI, so I use the basically GitHub's GUI to interface with GitHub rather than using Git. So it's a non-terminal based option for those who are less terminally inclined.
Right. There are a couple of different ways to make the contributions, and often those depend on different applications, like the GitHub desktop version, or getting an integrated development environment like PyCharm or Visual Studio Code. So, all right. So then we can go to the web page for PlasmaPy. And I have that here. And in the upper right, there is a button that says fork. And we want to go ahead and click that. So in the upper right part of the PlasmaPy repository, or whatever repository you want to work on, click fork. And I've already done this, so I'll click on the link to get to my fork of PlasmaPy. And my fork of PlasmaPy, like the forks that you would be creating, they're your own, and you can make whatever changes you want to them. And it'll be within these forks that will record the changes. The next step is to click on the code button. And under there, there are a couple of different options. And unless you've set up SSH, you can make sure that HTTPS is selected, and then you can click the button to the right, which will copy this text to the clipboard. So select HTTPS and then click the clipboard link there, and it'll have copied it. All right. Then I will go back to my terminal. And once we do that, we can create a directory. So I'm going to go to my home directory, cd space tilde, and make a directory mkdir hack week. And then I'm going to enter that directory, hack week. And within this directory is where we're going to put the repository. And the way that we do that, we do git clone, and then we paste the link that we had there. And it will be your username here instead of mine. So git clone, and then the link that we just copied. And it'll do that. It'll take a few minutes. And what it's doing now is it created a clone of your fork on GitHub. So you have your own version of PlasmaPy on GitHub, and that's your fork. And then you cloned that, you moved it, you copied it to your computer using the git clone command. And if I do ls to list the contents of the directory, there is now a directory called PlasmaPy. And the PlasmaPy directory, if we do cd and then ls, we see that there are different contents in it, which correspond to the code for PlasmaPy on GitHub. And if we do ls-a, we can see that there are several other files that start with a dot that didn't show up at first. And these are mostly configuration files. Okay. So the next thing that we need to do is connect our clone on our local clone on our computer to the main PlasmaPy repository. So we're going to go back to GitHub and click on, there's a button that says forked from PlasmaPy/PlasmaPy, and that will take us to the principal PlasmaPy repository. Once we get back to the principal PlasmaPy repository, we can click on code again, do the same thing as before, make sure that HTTPS is selected, and click on the clipboard button, which should be to the right of the web link. And once we do that, we want to add this. So we type git remote add, and then we'll name it upstream, and then copy and paste the link. What this is doing is telling your local computer that there's a remote repository, one that's located on GitHub for, in this case, the main PlasmaPy repository. And we name that remote connection upstream. And so we can do git remote to get the names of the two remotes. We can get a little bit more information if we do git remote -v. So the previous command says that we have remotes named origin and upstream. but it doesn't tell us anything about them. If we do git remote -v, then it will give us the full link to each of these repositories, each of these remotes. It's conventional in Git, or pretty much the default, to have your fork named origin. So this one corresponds to my own clone. So GitHub, NAMurphy/PlasmaPy, my version of PlasmaPy, which is origin. And then upstream of origin is the main PlasmaPy repository. All right. So these are the main ways, these are the steps to get set up to make a code contribution. And these steps, generally, you would only need to do once. Okay. So now we'll go on and make an actual code contribution. I'm going to type git fetch --all. And what this is doing is, should decrease the font size a little bit. This is telling Git on your computer to access and download the current state of each of these repositories. So in fetching origin, it was bringing down to your local computer everything from my version of PlasmaPy, and that was already done when we cloned it. And then when it was fetching upstream, it was getting PlasmaPy, PlasmaPy's main repository. And then it has a bunch of commands that I usually don't read. And then it lists the branches that were named and different tags. And the main branch to think about is main, which is the default branch for changes in PlasmaPy. And it's usually written as upstream/main. All right. So now that we have the information about PlasmaPy, both repositories, the original one and our own, we can take another step and create a branch for the new feature that we want to make. And the command to do that I usually use is git checkout -b, and then we add a descriptive branch name. And for this, I'm going to do add first contribution page. And then after getting it this name, we do upstream/main. And then press enter. And this command creates a branch and immediately moves us to it. And this branch is called add first contribution page. We can type git branch to check what branches exist, which are add first contribution page, and the asterisk indicates that this is the branch that we're on, and then master. Okay. Let's see, would someone else be able to respond to the comment just now in the chat? Let's see. might get main, you might get master. We just changed the main branch to main. So, but we won't be using this one. This one, oh, right, this is because I think this corresponds to my fork of PlasmaPy, so you should probably get main here. All right. The next thing to do is to connect the branch that we're on to GitHub, in particular to our own fork of PlasmaPy on GitHub. The command for that starts out with git push. And the way I usually like to think about it is that when I'm pushing something, I'm taking code that I have locally and pushing it towards GitHub. So you do git push dash dash set dash upstream. And then we specify the name of the remote, which in our case is origin. And then in this case, we'll do add first contribution page. The next thing that we need to do is log into GitHub. And hopefully I remember that. Yes, okay. I usually have it set up so that I don't have to type in my password every time. So if I was worried, I might forget it. All right. So the command git push set upstream origin add first contribution page. In this command, we're telling Git to push the branch that we're on and set it upstream to origin, which is our fork of PlasmaPy. And then we give it the branch name, which should be the same as the name of the branch that you created previously. Okay. So now if we type git branch, we have add first contribution page, and that is now linked to GitHub. Okay, so the next step is to go in and make a change to a file. So I'm going to type ls to see where I'm at. And the change that I want to make this time is in docs. So cd docs, and then type ls again. The docs directory contains the narrative documentation for PlasmaPy. And within that, we have a code development guide. So I'm going to enter the development directory and type ls again. And we have multiple pages, multiple files that contain the source for the documentation that describes how to contribute to and develop PlasmaPy. One thing that we currently don't have is a page that describes the workflow. So we do touch, and then we can call it workflow.rst, and then type ls again. When I ran the command touch workflow.rst, what that's doing is creating a file called workflow.rst and making that, or it's creating an empty file. The .rst corresponds to restructured text. And I'll type that out. The hash sign, the number sign, is a comment in the shell. and have that be, let's do dash dash, put an arrow and have it be .rst. Restructured text is a format that when you read a file, it will be understandable enough as plain text. And it also contains markup commands that when PlasmaPy's website is generated, it'll make it look nice and create links and things like that. All right. The next thing that I want to do is open this file. And for this, I'm going to use a plain text editor called Nano and use that to open workflow.rst. You don't have to use Nano. You can use whatever plain text editor that you want, or IDE. Nano is one that works pretty well in the terminal, and it's a good default. So you can use Emacs, VI, or other ones that I can't remember, Notepad++, Sublime Text, things like that. So I type nano workflow.rst. And then I'm going to start by giving a title to this. So on the second line, I'm going to type how to contribute to PlasmaPy, and then put a bunch of equal signs before and then after. And then in Nano, I press Control X to save it, and then yes, Y to confirm, and then press Enter to confirm that I want to add workflow.rst. The next thing that I do usually is to type git status. And when I type git status, it's saying that there is an untracked file named workflow.rst. And for this, I'm going to do git add workflow.rst. And then do git status again. And now it's saying that under changes to be committed, the command or the question in the text for Nano, I'll open it and close it again, nano workflow.rst, and then Control X to exit. I will make one more change. We can add a section, many ways to contribute, and then put a bunch of equal signs there. So we can make another change, save modified buffer, and then Control X to say we want to exit, Enter, and then just Y to save. All right. And now that we did that, we can type git status again. And then we have to, there's some changes that are recorded in workflow.rst, but we also want to modify, or we want to add the modification. So we can do git add workflow.rst again and type git status. Okay, so now it's saying changes to be committed, and we have a new file, workflow.rst. And right now, Git knows that we have a file that is not yet recorded in the history. And we want to record it in the history by typing git commit -m, where the M stands for the commit message. I'm going to say create file for workflow documentation, and then press enter. And I can type git status again. It's my favorite command. And now it's saying that we're still on the same branch, and the branch we're on now on our local computer is ahead of the same branch on our add first contribution page by 1 commit. There are a couple of strategies for writing commit messages. In general, it's best to start with an action verb in the present tense. So create file or add whatever functionality. And it's helpful to keep it under 50 characters. Though it's more important to make sure that the commit message is understandable. All right. So git status is being helpful because it's saying git push to publish. We can use git push to publish our local commits. So take the changes that we have here and push them to GitHub. And we can do this, type git push by itself, because we already connected the branch to a corresponding branch on GitHub. And a commit, yeah, it is like an archive point, like a snapshot of the code. So I'm going to push this, and then type in my password, which hopefully you can't understand through the keystrokes, and press enter. And now it pushed the changes to GitHub. All right. So the next thing, if I can remember where the web browser is, I'm going to go to PlasmaPy's main directory and refresh it. And what showed up for me is that there's a command, or there's a helpful banner that says that the branch that I was just working on had recent pushes less than a minute ago, and that there's an option to compare and pull request. And so I'm going to go ahead and click this. And in this case, this would be a good place to not follow along with the tutorial for a moment. There'll be a chance to do this later. So you can skip this step on your own computer. And we can create a file for workflow documentation. That's the commit message that I had. And I'm going to change that. Start a documentation page for workflow documentation. And then as a default, there is some text in there that describes, it has a link to the chat room. It has a link to the developer guide, which this commit is going to update. And then a list of steps that are needed. And in this case, these are all, most of these are commented out except for the checklist. But I'm going to type a description here, which is this pull request is to create the outline of a page. It's too large. To create the outline of a page in our code development guide that describes the development workflow for or that we use when contributing to PlasmaPy. So I have a relatively short pull request message, and then a quick description of what the change is, something that is understandable. And the start documentation page. So yeah, so this is a short description, and then a longer description here. So what I'm going to do next, showing up kind of funny on GitHub. So what I'm going to do is to create the pull request, but in this case, this is the step to not follow along with yet. You'll have a chance to do this after. All right. So I just created a this pull request. And in this, there's a conversation, there's the checklist of things that are needed. And you can find the commits, and it has one commit listed. And then it has a bunch of checks that are running. And we'll get to those later. And we want to see what the changes were. We can go to Files Changed and then scroll down. And it's saying that in docs/development/workflow.rst, we've added the title of the page and a first section. So how to contribute to PlasmaPy, and then many ways to contribute. Okay, so I'm going to post a link to this in the chat, so you can follow along with it. Okay, so this step, you won't have done yet, but all right. So we can also see that near the top of just below the title, it's saying that I, N.A. Murphy, want to merge one commit into PlasmaPy main, the main development branch of PlasmaPy, and it's coming from my fork called N.A. Murphy, and then the particular branch, which is add first contribution page. If I click on this, it will take me to the to my fork, and in the upper left button below, it has a list of the branches and then a whole bunch of different branches here, and it's selected add first contribution page. Okay, so that's the way to create a pull request on GitHub. And the way I think of pull is that you want to pull the changes that are somewhere else back into a different repository. So I'm requesting that the main PlasmaPy repository pull in some changes that I'm proposing. Okay. And usually at this stage of the contribution process, I forget where I'm at. So I'm going to type git status again and see that there's nothing to commit, and then type git log. And we see one commit. This is similar to what you saw during the tutorial yesterday. And it has a message, create file for workflow documentation by me earlier today in the Eastern time zone. So Git push is similar to upload. It's you have something on your computer, and you want to push it to the desktop. So you can do that. You can do that in the browser. 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 You can do that from your computer, you're telling it to push it to your fork on GitHub. All right. And like I said, I usually get kind of lost here. All right, so I'm going to type ls again. And we have a new file, workflow.rst. And I'm going to, oh, how to get out of the log view. So I type git log and then Q is to get out of it. I'd actually do that too, remember how. I think Control C will also work. Nope, it doesn't. It's Q. Okay. So I type ls, and then I'm going to open a different file this time. And this one is going to be index.rst. And here I'm going to add workflow to the table of contents. And I'm not sure if this is going to be exactly the place where we want it, but I'm going to start off with it here for now. And then press Control X and then Y and enter to exit nano. And then type git status and a modified index.rst. Then I want to do git add index.rst and press enter. Git status again. So its index is in the staging area. So it's we're telling Git to get ready to record a snapshot with these changes. And then type git commit -m. And in this case, I'm add workflow page to index of development guide. All right. And that was a little bit long, but it's understandable, so it's fine. And then git log again. And it's showing our previous two commits. And then git status. We're ahead of origin add first contribution page by one commit, as we want to push the changes from our local computer to publish our local commits. So I'm surprised I haven't made any password typing errors yet. Okay. And then if we go to, oops, wrong window. If we go to the PlasmaPy repository and under pull requests, we have started documentation page for workflow documentation. And we have files changed too. So it's listing both of the changes. And then with that, I'm going to go back to, let's see. To add a few more section headings. So I'm going to enter nano again and type workflow.rst. And then maybe add some more sections beforehand. We want to install Git, and then I'll create the equal signs underneath represent a section header, and using regular dashes corresponds to a subsection header. So we install Git and then create a GitHub account, and then put in a bunch of dashes. That should be the same length as before. And then say getting started. And essentially put in the changes that we had before. So we want to fork the repository. That's clicking the fork button. Clone the repository. So we take our fork and clone it to our local computer, and then set up remotes. And then for the workflow, we can fetch recent changes, create a new branch, connect the branch to GitHub, make changes, and then commit the changes, and then push the changes to GitHub. You don't have to follow along with this right now. Create a pull request. Add a changelog entry. Well, that's one thing that I forgot to do, so good thing I'm writing this out. And then there will be a code review step. And then at the end, we want a section that's on like getting help. And there's a reason why I'm going through all of these changes or putting in all of these section titles. Okay, so I want to save this. A command that Sterling talked about yesterday is Git Diff. And Git Diff will tell us what the changes are. And we see a whole bunch of section headings. All right, and I don't want to type ls, I want to type git status again. And these are not staged yet. So we want to git add workflow.rst and press enter. And then git commit -m. And in this case, I want to add sections in workflow page and press enter. Now, if we type git diff, it won't show any changes because these git diff will do the changes that we haven't staged for commit. But we can type git diff -- cached. Oh, I lied. This didn't show up because I already did the commit. In between this step where we do the git add workflow.rst, but before git commit -m, we can type git diff -- cached, CACHED, to get the changes that are being ready for being committed. Okay. So now I'm going to go to, again, that's the wrong window. Go back to this pull request. And yay, I like party icons. There are a couple of things that get automatically posted. There's an automatic label that says that this is changing documentation, so the documentation gets added. There are the commits. There's this, which shouldn't be there. I'm not sure why that happened. And then, yeah, this is where the documentation label got added. The next thing that shows up is a code_cov report. And what this is doing is saying, going through the new code and looking at which of the changes are being covered by tests and which aren't. And this helps us figure out what new tests we want to write. In this case, we're not changing any code itself, only documentation. so we don't have to worry about that. And then we scroll down and there's the next commit. And then it says review required. So I need at least one approving review by reviewers with write access. And then it also says that, oh, some checks were not successful. In general, all of these checks have to pass in order for a code contribution to be merged. And the check marks mean that the test passed. And if we click on details, we can get information about that and click on different things. If there were any problems, then we can go through and get more details on those. And then I'll go back and scroll up to these again. And oh, there's a red X. The red X means that this particular check is not passing. So the next thing that I want to do is to add a changelog entry. All right. Okay, so we can take a moment now and pause for questions. Well, before that, one quick thing. Under the reviewers tab, I can request up to 15 reviewers, and I'm only going to request, let's say, 2. And then click outside of that. And so now it's awaiting review by a couple other people from PlasmaPy. Okay, so now we can take a moment and ask for, or if there are any questions. Okay, David is asking, what is the difference between main/master and origin? Origin corresponds to the fork on PlasmaPy. Origin is the whole thing on GitHub that corresponds to, that's my version. So origin is the name of the remote that corresponds to the fork. Main and master are branches. So if I go to below code, there's a button that says, in this case, master, and there are a bunch of different branches. So let's see. So main and master are branches, and origin is the remote/fork. Right. If there's a suggestion, or feel free to expand on that in the chat. All right. So the next question is, as a rule of thumb, when should I commit changes during coding? In practice, what I usually try to do is whenever I have a pretty much an equivalent to a paragraph of code is when I commit it. It's kind of arbitrary. So sometimes you want to save it at a particular point. Like if you have it working and you want to add new features, that's usually a good time to commit. But in general, committing reasonably often is a good way to go about it. All right.
I'll add that I will generally commit. I like to commit frequently, but I specifically like to commit with logical blocks, because as we talked about yesterday, you have a Git history. So if you're committing in logical blocks, it's easier to go back into the history and remember what you're doing. But sometimes that's not feasible and you just need to make a commit to add the changes you've made.
And if I may chime in for a second here, there are also tools such as Git Bisect, which actually, if you commit incrementally, using the one commit is a single concept during development, then Git Bisect will actually automatically allow you to pinpoint the exact moment in which you introduced a bug that broke something, which is amazing, which is exactly why that incremental approach is awesome.
Yes. Often, so another strategy for committing that I use is that if I have to use the word "and" in the commit, then that commit is too big. So if I say add new workflow documentation page and add page to index, that would be two logical concepts in the code. And it's often helpful to keep things like one concept for commit. Yeah, I like that idea. And what other things? Should I do pull request in small incremental steps or one large pull request? Yes. Incremental, smaller pull requests are better than monolithic pull requests. If you have one humongous pull request, then chances are it ends up being 17 headaches to review, and often it takes longer for it to review and get merged. So keeping things smaller, more manageable is really helpful.
Yeah, that the logical block comment we made about commits also applies to pull requests, but kind of on a slightly larger scale.
Yeah. So adding one function is generally a good practice, or a couple of small functions that are really closely related. Oh, another thing with pull requests is that they should be focused on a particular set of changes to the code. If you're changing one thing that is in the particle subpackage and then something else in formulary, which is completely unrelated, it's better to have two pull requests instead of one. This is something that a mistake I have done in the past and will probably do again. But it's more manageable to keep things separated into logical concepts. Okay, if I don't create a pull request, can I still see the files I made changes from in the browser? Yes. If I go to, if we go to our own fork and then click on, I have a lot of things there. I can't remember what the branch name was. Oh, add first contribution page. So under the button for a branch, you can click on that. And then, let's see, then you can navigate through and find the different changes that you made. So the development guide, and then in this case, workflow. If you want to, let's see, there are ways to compare two branches. I think that would be a good topic for later, partially because I can't quite remember how to do it. All right. How does RST relate to Sphinx and docs.plasmapy.org? .rst corresponds to restructured text, and restructured text is essentially the language, the markup language that the documentation is written in. Sphinx is the tool that we use to generate the documentation. Sphinx takes .rst files and generates everything that shows up on, say, docs.plasmapy.org.
I will add, Sphinx is a third-party package that was originally developed to document Python code. It was originally developed to document Python's own code. So when you go to Python's documentation page, it is generated with Sphinx.
Right. All right. Is it better to make 2 branches for those? So does that, Steve, does that correspond to?
So you were talking about if you were working to develop something in the particles area, or then you did something in the dispersion area. But I don't think you talked about at that point the concept of 2 branches and maybe how you keep things separate.
Yes, you would create a new branch for each of those changes. You should create 1 branch and 1 corresponding pull request for each logical conceptual change to the code. You want to make changes together that are related. So you would create 2 branches for that. If you're making similar changes, like changing the format of a doc string, that would be 1 conceptual change where you can make that in multiple packages, though it is still better to keep things smaller.
Steve, the question you're asking, are you asking the situation where you have a branch and you've opened up a pull request to get the stuff merged, and then you want to work on another feature that uses the changes from those branch, but will end up being a additional pull request?
It seemed like how would you address a way of compartmentalizing different areas of the code, different sub packages that you would want to work on? And I guess the concept of multiple branches hadn't been introduced for everyone yet.
I would say you want to, I wouldn't think about it as making a separate branch for, say, each sub package. You would want to make a separate branch for each idea that you're working on, each project you're working on.
Each feature or bug fix or that kind of thing, that kind of conceptual level.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
There are some slight exceptions to that. If you notice a typo in a different package, then maybe it's not so bad to include that in an unrelated pull request. Not ideal, but in practice, it's okay. I've gotten away with it.
I'll even point out for PlasmaPy itself, we have another use for branches. If you look at the GitHub code base, you'll see we have several branches, but we actually have branches related to past release versions. So these aren't branches that we're developing on, but they're more like frozen instances in time, so people can go back and more easily explore them, even though they're not generally added to.
Right. Okay. And I would say that I personally would say that small typos are worth creating pull requests over. In particular, they're a good first pull request. If you notice one, you can create an issue for that, and then let's see, I lost my sentence. You can create an issue for that and have it labeled as a good first contribution. Okay, I think those were most of the questions. All right, so now I would like to hand it over to
Nick, there's one more question from Lily that
Oh.
you might want to look at.
Which one was that?
Going over again how to push the changes, because we looked at the file under her fork and the workflow was empty.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's do ls and you type git status, and it should show up that it's clean. Oh, no, it doesn't. Okay. So if I type git log, I see that I added sections in the workflow page, and then I type ls. And so those recent changes are local, but they haven't been pushed up to GitHub. And if you do git status and you say that your branch is ahead by one commit, then you can type git push and then type in your thing, your login. Let me try that again. All right. And this is done after git push set upstream, and then it'll be origin and then the branch name, which is add first contribution page. This command only needs to be done once per branch. And in this case, it didn't need to push anything separate because it was already up to date. Okay, are there any other questions? One possibility. So if I go to my fork on PlasmaPy, by default, it won't be at the new branch that you just created. So you have to go to the button that has a little icon that represents branching, and then the name of a branch. And then go to select the branch that you're working on. And then what I usually do is navigate to the files that I changed. So navigate to docs/development/workflow.rst. There are probably other ways to do this that will compare two branches, but I forgot how to do those. All right. Okay, so now if I go back to PlasmaPy's main page, taking a moment for some reason. Try putting a new one. Okay, GitHub is taking its time. Eric or Dominic, would either of you be interested in doing a review for this quickly?
Already done.
Oh, wow, okay. If only I could access the website. Okay, it worked now. All right, so I click on, go back to the pull request, and then there were some comments added to this. I scroll all the way down, and then I get a part or a comment looks good. And yes, we will expand this part in a follow-up pull request. And I'll say, yep, we'll be working on that soon. And then I can press colon to get a cat emoji because I like cats. Cool. All right. So the changes were approved. And there are a few tests that look like they're still running. And there's still a changelog entry that's missing. So there's still this red X that it's fitting that it's missing because I usually end up procrastinating working on these. So we now have to add a changelog. So I'm going to type pwd to print the working directory. And then do cd ... and then ls and pwd again, print working directory. So we're
Hey,
in.
What is a changelog and why are you doing it?
Oh, that is a good question that I completely forgot to bring up. A changelog is every time we release PlasmaPy, we provide a list of the changes that have been made since the previous version. And the reason why we need a changelog is that if there are packages that depend on PlasmaPy, then they would need to know what the changes were, like what changes they would have to make to their packages. And the changelog is a really helpful way for doing that. And we have an automated way of compiling the changelog entries. So we can do cd changelog and then type ls again. And in this directory, in the changelog directory, there are a bunch of files that have a number, which is the number of the pull request that was merged. A tag after that, where doc corresponds to documentation, feature corresponds to a new feature, trivial means a change that didn't really have any substantive effect, and a breaking change, which are the most important to document. We can also look in the contents of readme.rst, type cat readme.rst, where cat stands for concatenate. And this has a list of can't change the screen size, a list of the tags that we can use. So breaking, feature, bug fix, doc, removal, or trivial. And if we want to have more than one entry per pull request, we can put .1 or .2 or .3 after that. And then we end it with .rst to indicate that it's a restructured text file. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the pull request and there is a comment. We need a changelog, and I will add a thumbs up and a party and a rocket for no particularly important reason. And
this is, by the way, usually our review workflow. I play the good cop and Eric plays the changelog cop.
This is true. All right. So yes, it is pull request number 1178. Okay, so I'm going to create a new file, nano, and it is 1178. And this is a documentation change. So you can type doc and then RST. That'll open this. And here we want to add often one sentence, sometimes a couple of sentences that describe the change. So started a page in the development guide on in PlasmaPy's narrative documentation that describes the workflow required to contribute to PlasmaPy. And then Control X to say I want to exit, Y that I want to save it, and then confirm the name. And then we can go through the step again, type git status. This file that we just created is not there. Then git add 1178.doc.rst, git status again, and it's being staged. And then git commit -m, and then add a changelog entry because Eric said so. I don't actually have to have that. Add a changelog entry. And then git status again. We're ahead by 1 commit. And then git push. Then type in stuff, and now it's on GitHub. Okay. And now, let's see. So it now added this commit. We can click on the commit if we want to see more information about it, which is often useful if you're reviewing code. And now there is 1 change requested, which we addressed, and 1 approval. And now that it's been approved, we would be able to merge it.
So,
And
Nick,
okay.
how do we know what the documentation is going to look like?
Oh, that is another good question. I'm going to scroll up a bit and go to a previous test because that one is done. And in the list of checks, there are 2 that are related to documentation. There's the CI continuous integration / documentation for the pull request, which is essentially a check. And then docs / read the docs for PlasmaPy. And this one gives, if you click on details, it will give a preview of the documentation. And increase the size. And in the web address, it has the number for the pull request. And we want to look at our guide for contributors. And this is how it shows up in the index page. We can click on that. And this is the page that we just created. And it has all of the section headings. And when you change the documentation, it's important to review it to make sure that it's showing up the way that you want it to. It can take a little while for the documentation to be generated. So I often walk away and forget to do it. And then I get reminded by Eric. But yeah, it's still important. So I'm going to go back.
How about the change logs? Does it show up anywhere?
I assume it does. It shows up near the bottom under all the rest. You can click on that. And then for PlasmaPy 0.7.dev whatever, you can click on that. And then it lists backward incompatible changes, deprecations, and removals for the different things. Improved documentation. And then, which one is this? Oh, the reason why it's not showing up here is because I'm looking at an older version of the documentation that was built. So when it does show up, it'll be something like this. Okay. And it's good too. The changelog entry is important, and it's tempting to not really spend that much time on it, but it is something that it's important to make sure that it's understandable to users of PlasmaPy and developers who depend on PlasmaPy. So it's worth putting a little bit of effort. And that was my inner Eric speaking. Okay. All right. So let's see, I'll refresh this. And then changelog found, documentation stuff is still generating. But since this is to not make us wait any longer, I'm going to use my administrator superpowers and squash on merge. I'll click on this. This is not the best thing to do, but we can do it on the special occasion. So I'll squash and merge and then confirm it. And what the squash and merge is doing is combining all of the individual commits into one commit for the entire pull request. So it's a way to keep our development history a bit cleaner. I'm going to do that. And then I get this, that the pull request is successfully merged and closed. And then press delete branch because I don't need it anymore. And we're set. So this was the process of the pull request for PlasmaPy. Okay. So now what was it? Right. So we can take a moment and again, in case there are any questions.
So Nick, do you have to rely on the checks of the pull requests to see what your documentation is built like?
No, you can build documentation locally, and that is something which Eric strongly recommends. And so we go to, did I close that? No, okay. All right, so print the working directory and then cd / and go into docs and then type make HTML. This is right, Eric, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I usually skip this part because I'm lazy and let GitHub do the work for me.
Yeah, and the notebooks take a long time to execute here.
Yes.
So if you notice, we over the last year, we tried to get in the habit of including a lot of documentation via notebook. So every time you build the documentation, you actually have to execute the notebooks as well. And so we have a few notebooks that take quite some time to generate.
Yep. The last 9% takes a lot of the time. Okay. So if you have a package that you're in the process of creating and want to set up documentation for that, please feel free to stop by PlasmaPy's office hours or reach out to us on Discord, and we're happy to talk with you about that. I'll especially volunteer Eric. You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. And because this is taking a while, I'm going to press Control-C to finish it.
So Jerome asked a question about the CI for read the docs, and the CI, the continuous integration for read the docs is readily available, but it depends on the package and the maintainers to hook it up for their package. Because if you saw in the demo I did yesterday, that the demo repository I had no checks in it because I didn't set any kind of checks up. I didn't integrate any CIs, whereas in PlasmaPy, we have that stuff set up already.
Yeah, read the docs has gotten a bit easier to use in the last few years. Okay. All right, so these are the steps for the contributions. I think those were all the questions. So for anyone who wants to stick around, there are a couple of possibilities for good first contributions. This did end up taking a little bit longer than I wanted because Eric acted as my conscience and reminded me of things that I needed to talk about. So I created a Google Doc that has a list of good first contributions. I made it earlier today, so yes, I was running a little bit behind in preparations. On PlasmaPy's repository, you can access it. Under issues, there is a tab, a label called Good First Contribution. And we can click on that, and that will go through and look at good first contributions. So if someone knows a lot about plasma waves, there's one that's describe the physics behind the upper and lower hybrid frequencies. So this is an example that came from the tutorial earlier as something that doesn't describe the physics. And that would be a change to the documentation. You can also add examples for a particular function. There are a couple of changes that you can edit a function and say that gyroradius used to be ion gyroradius, and so there's an underscore I in it, which is no longer correct. So you can go through and remove the underscore I. And then there are other ones that depend on, like some involve a bit of knowledge of Python, others are fairly straightforward or might depend on some knowledge of plasma physics. In addition to that, on the documentation page, I want to go to, the default is for the stable version of the documentation to show up. And I'm not sure if this will show up yet. But if we go back to, oh, that's not it, an overview. Nope, looks like it's not there yet. It takes a few minutes for the read the docs to build. All of the sections that we created, I'll open the file. So
sorry to interrupt, but at the moment I'm looking at why our documentation builds on the main website have actually been failing for maybe a week now, and I've just noticed. So please don't wait for it, but I will try to get it back up as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Documentation looks fine.
Yeah, we'll get on that. So let's see, cd docs/development. no, I was already in the docs directory, so cd/development, then ls, and then can open workflow, tab complete. So each of these sections, it only has a header right now. And for anyone who's interested, you can choose one of these sections to make a pull request for and like add some text to it. So that's another option. And it's a little bit of an experimental way of doing this. But if you're interested, then I think posting on the Google Doc that I just created would be a way to go about it. All right, so if you want to go through the process yourself of making a contribution, you're welcome to stick around. You're welcome to come back to us or stop by PlasmaPy's office hours later, or reach out to us on Discord also. So the formal part of the tutorial of the hack session is done now.